What happens when small-minded arrogance collides with quiet, unshakable authority? In the swirling, impatient crowd of JFK Airport, a gate agent, flush with the false confidence that comes from a laminated badge, made a decision in the span of a heartbeat. She looked at a black woman waiting in the first-class line, a woman whose presence was a study in composure and grace, and decided she didn't belong. With a polite but pointed smile that barely concealed a sneer, she gestured toward the snaking queue of economy passengers. "Economy line is over there, ma'am." She didn't realize who she was speaking to. The woman was Dr. Liana Mercer, founder and CEO of one of the most valuable technology companies in the world. And with one motion so small, it could have been mistaken for checking the time, she would set off a chain reaction that would not only cancel her own flight, but erase the departure for 50 other passengers, stall an international launch, and quietly cost the airline millions. The terminal had its own rhythm that morning, a restless tide of motion under vaulted glass and steel. It smelled faintly of espresso, disinfectant, and the sharp metallic whisper of jet fuel. Announcements spilled from ceiling speakers in practiced monotony. Families herded children with crumpled boarding passes. Business travelers hunched over phones. Backpackers shifted from foot to foot. It was a current of humanity, each person certain they had somewhere important to be. Liana stood like a rock in that current. A deep emerald green pantsuit hugged her tall frame with understated elegance. Her hair, in fine, waist-length twists threaded with tiny copper beads, shimmered subtly under the harsh terminal lights. Even as people jostled and voices rose, she remained utterly still, her eyes tracking the gate ahead. She wasn't traveling alone. Spread across the boarding area, 50 members of her team chatted in small clusters or typed furiously on laptops balanced across carry-on bags. Engineers, product leads, strategists, every one of them dressed sharp enough to meet investors the moment they landed. Their destination, the Global Tech Vanguard Summit in London. Their mission, to debut a medical haptics breakthrough that would redefine surgical training around the world. The deal waiting for them on the other side of the Atlantic was enormous. 2 years of negotiations with European giant Medicine Dynamics, a partnership that could triple her company's valuation overnight. Liana's company, Novaris Systems, had gone from spare bedroom prototype to a billion-dollar market leader in just under a decade, and this summit would cement its dominance. David Hahn, her COO and longtime confidant, caught her eye from across the waiting area. He held up a hand in a silent, all-accounted-for gesture. Every ticket, first and business class, was checked in and cleared. It was a point of principle for Liana. Long-haul international travel demanded comfort and respect for the people who made her company what it was. That wasn't extravagance. That was leadership. Liana's lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. She'd fought too long and too hard to let anyone diminish what she'd built. She remembered the early years, being talked over in investor meetings, having her patents dismissed until they were validated by male colleagues, fighting to be seen as more than a promising diversity hire. Every inch of ground had been won through relentless preparation, unshakable focus, and the ability to make impossible things happen without raising her voice. The overhead speakers crackled. "We are now pleased to begin boarding for Apex Continental Flight 710 with service to London Heathrow. First-class passengers may board at this time." Liana stepped forward, boarding pass ready. That was when the gate agent, eyes scanning her once from shoes to hair, shifted in front of her path and spoke. It was quick. It was casual. And it was exactly the kind of casual that cut deep. For half a second, Liana didn't react. Then, slowly, she tucked her boarding pass back into her jacket pocket. She glanced down at the thin gold watch on her wrist, its face gleaming in the overhead light, and reached for her phone. One tap, one sure call, one quiet instruction. She ended the call before the gate agent even turned away from the podium. And then she simply waited. We'd like to invite our first-class passengers, along with Apex Diamond and Platinum members, to board at this time through the priority lane. Dr. Liana Mercer rose smoothly from her seat, lifting her slim black leather briefcase in one hand and the handle of her carry-on in the other. The bag wasn't flashy, but its fine stitching and brushed steel hardware spoke of quiet expense. A few of her senior staff, also seated in the front cabin, stood and fell in behind her. The rest of the team remained scattered through the waiting area, knowing they'd board later with their business class zones. The gate was manned by two attendants. The first, a young man with a tidy haircut and unshakable patience, scanned passports in a steady rhythm, each beep of his scanner punctuating the hum of the terminal. The second was a woman in her late 40s, name tag reading Marla Givens, her expression set in a way that made her look as if she'd just bitten into something sour. Her pale hair was scraped back into a tight bun, and her cool gray eyes moved over the crowd, not in welcome, but in scrutiny. It was the look of someone who ruled a very small patch of territory and took their power very seriously. As Liana approached, Marla's eyes caught hers, then slowly traveled downward, taking in her tailored emerald suit, polished shoes, and the subtle jewelry that caught the terminal lights. Ahead of her, a white businessman in a rumpled blazer got little more than a bored glance at his ticket before being waved through. When Liana stepped forward, holding out her passport and boarding pass, she offered a polite, "Good morning." Marla didn't return the greeting. She didn't even glance at the documents in Liana's hand. Instead, she made a curt motion toward the much longer, looping line to their right. "Economy line's over there, ma'am," she said. Her voice wasn't sharp, but it carried that heavy, syrupy condescension of someone speaking down rather than across. The ma'am wasn't respect. It was dismissal dressed as courtesy. For the briefest moment, Liana stood still. The terminal noise dulled in her ears, replaced by the quick flare of heat in her chest. She knew this feeling well. The sting of being misread, misjudged, reduced to a single assumption before a word had been spoken. She'd endured it in academic halls, at investor tables, on corporate stages. And she had learned long ago how to turn that heat into something precise, something sharp. "I believe I'm in the correct line," she said evenly, extending her boarding pass another inch. "I'm a first-class passenger." Marla let out a small, incredulous breath through her nose, the kind someone might give a child insisting on an impossible claim. "Lots of people believe they're in the right line," she said, her lips curling into a faint smirk. "Priority lanes for first class and our high-tier status members. General boarding is on the right." Still, she didn't look at the ticket. The decision had already been made in her head. The tailored suit, the calm authority, the luggage, it all disappeared through the lens of her bias. What remained was only the color of the woman standing before her. Behind Liana, David Hahn's jaw tightened. Two more of her executives, Amira Patel, her sharp-eyed legal counsel, and Brandon Ng, a lead systems engineer, exchanged a look somewhere between disbelief and outrage. Both shifted forward, ready to step in. Without turning, Liana's free hand made the smallest downward motion, a subtle press of her palm. "Stand down. I got this." They froze in place. None of them had ever doubted her ability to handle a confrontation. "Perhaps," Liana said, her voice losing its warmth and taking on a polished, steel-edged calm, "you could do me the courtesy of looking at my boarding pass. It might clear up your confusion." For the first time, Marla's expression flickered. The smirk faded, replaced by a thin line of lips. With an exaggerated sigh, she plucked the pass from Liana's fingers and scanned it with a slow, almost theatrical motion. Her eyes passed over the name, Dr. Liana Mercer. Seat 1A. Fair class. First. For a moment, she said nothing. A brief flash, something between surprise and embarrassment, crossed Marla Given's face. But it vanished almost instantly, replaced by the brittle shield of defensive arrogance. Admitting she'd been wrong would mean chipping away at her little kingdom behind the gate counter, and she wasn't about to do that. She slid the boarding pass back toward Dr. Liana Mercer without making eye contact. My mistake. We've had a lot of people trying to get on early today. System's been glitchy, she said, her voice grudging, the tone of someone granting a favor rather than performing the most basic part of her job. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the bias hanging in the air between them. Liana didn't move. She stood perfectly still, the boarding pass in one hand, her other resting lightly on the handle of her carry-on. The line behind her was starting to snake farther into the terminal. The young male agent at the other scanner glanced over, a crease of concern forming between his brows. A glitchy system, Liana repeated softly, letting the words linger just long enough to frost the air. Is that what we're calling it? Marla's lips thinned. Do you want to board the plane or not? She snapped, impatience slipping into her voice. You're holding up the line. That was the moment it clicked. This was no longer about a flight to London, not about making the morning meeting on time. This was about something far deeper, about principle. It was about every time one of her brilliant engineers had been mistaken for hotel staff at a tech summit. Every time David Hahn had been told his English was impressive despite being born in Seattle. Every time an investor had asked who the real CEO of Stratacore Technologies was. Her company wasn't just a business. It was a statement, a living, breathing reminder that brilliance doesn't come pre-packaged in a certain skin tone, gender, or accent. And here was Marla Givens, with her tight bun and tighter prejudices, dismissing that truth with a flick of her wrist. Liana made her choice. She would not board this flight. More than that, her company would not board this flight. The multi-million-dollar deal could wait. True power wasn't about the privilege of a first-class seat. It was about deciding whether the plane was even worth flying on. Her gaze met Marla's, cool and unwavering. No anger, no raised voice, just a measured, quiet verdict. Then, without a word, she stepped back from the lane. The air around the gate seemed to thicken. Marla, misreading the moment entirely, straightened with smug satisfaction. In her mind, she'd won, forced a difficult passenger to back down. She flicked her hand toward the next traveler, an older man who hurried forward, grateful to escape the tension. But Liana hadn't retreated. She had simply repositioned herself, one step back, enough to carve out a small space in the tightly packed gate area. Her team, still clustered nearby, watched her with a mix of curiosity and anticipation. They recognized the expression on her face. It was the same look she wore before cutting a failing project loose, before pivoting Stratacore's entire trajectory on a single market insight. It was the look of someone who had already decided exactly how this was going to end. She set her carry-on gently on the floor, unzipped the outer pocket, and pulled out her phone. Sleek, matte black, and discreetly embossed with the company's logo, a prototype model with a custom tactile interface. Her thumbs moved across the glass with quiet precision. No flurry of angry swipes. No performative key tapping. Every motion deliberate, every keystroke purposeful, like a surgeon making an incision. Marla shot her a sidelong glance, lips curling faintly. Probably texting a friend to complain, she thought, feeling the small, mean pleasure of having put someone in their place. In her version of events, she was defending order, protecting the sanctity of the boarding process from those trying to skirt the rules. To her, This elegant woman in a jewel-toned suit was just another entitled passenger to be put back in line. But Liana wasn't texting a friend. She opened an encrypted group chat labeled Stratacor Command. 3 members: herself, David Hahn, and Maria Gutierrez, her logistical chief back in New York. Brilliant, unshakable, and capable of rerouting an entire global operation with a single email. She typed, "All personnel, abort London Transit. Incident at gate. Stand by for further." And she pressed send. "Full team withdrawal, effective immediately. Daniel, initiate extraction protocol. Marissa, execute contingency alpha. Charter the Gulf Stream. Destination Farnham. Cars ready on arrival. Reschedule Neuralink meeting for tomorrow, 15:20 GMT. Cite unavoidable logistical failure with our commercial carrier." Liana Mercer's thumbs moved in perfect rhythm. The message sent in less than 15 seconds. A silent digital detonation. Across the lounge seating, Daniel Park's phone buzzed. He read the message, his expression tightening only slightly. When his eyes met Liana's, she gave him the same steady, unblinking look she used in boardrooms before making high-stakes decisions. He gave one crisp nod. The order was given. The order would be carried out. He rose to his feet, his voice calm, but cutting through the terminal noise with ease. "Stratacor team, change of plans. Bags in hand. We're leaving." The effect was immediate and oddly elegant. 50 people who had been settling in for a long-haul first-class and business-class journey stood as one. Laptops closed. Zippers sealed. Conversations halted mid-sentence. No panic, no chatter, just a smooth, almost military withdrawal. They moved like a unit because in many ways they were. Trust wasn't optional in their work. It was built into the company's DNA. If Liana and Daniel said move, they moved. Sophie Allen and Ben Carter, both of whom had been close enough to witness the earlier exchange at the gate, were the first to reach her side. "You okay?" Sophie asked, voice low, concern evident. "I'm fine," Liana replied, calm and even. "But our business with Continental Apex ends today. Permanently." The sight was impossible to miss. 50 passengers abandoning a gate in perfect unison wasn't something that happened quietly. Curious travelers turned in their seats to watch. The polite junior gate agent stood frozen, his eyes wide. Marla Givens, however, still hadn't pieced it together. Her smugness hadn't yet shifted into the dawning comprehension that this was more than a single passenger refusing to board. That realization began when Daniel approached the young agent. Not her. "We are the Stratacor Group," he said, polite but firm, holding up his phone to show a passenger manifest. "All 50 of us are withdrawing from this flight. Please cancel our tickets and arrange immediate return of our checked baggage to the main terminal carousel." The agent blinked rapidly. First in business class, 50 cancellations. The revenue loss alone would hit 5 figures. He hesitated, unsure how to process something of this scale. And then Marla understood. This wasn't one woman sulking in the boarding area. This was an entire corporate contingent walking away in unison, and the woman she had just tried to diminish was clearly the one holding the reins. A cold, prickling knot formed in her stomach. She strode toward Daniel, trying to reclaim her position of authority. "Sir, what's the issue? You can't just walk away. The flight is boarding." Daniel's expression remained unreadable. "We can, and we are. There was an incident. Our CEO was treated unacceptably by your staff. We maintain professional standards for all our partners and vendors. Continental Apex has failed to meet them." He didn't raise his voice, didn't point fingers. The delivery was surgical, precise, final, devastating. Then he turned his back and resumed directing the team's exit. Marla's color shifted. Anger flushed red into her cheeks, then drained as realization deepened. "My staff, I was just following procedure, she stammered, her voice pitching upward. Liana, who had been silent until now, finally stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of a closing door. Your procedure, she said evenly, was to assume a black woman in a tailored suit couldn't possibly belong in first class. Your procedure was to humiliate her rather than take 2 seconds to read her ticket. The terminal seemed to grow quieter. Even the background boarding calls felt distant. Liana didn't wait for a reply. She simply turned, collected her carry-on, and walked away, 50 people falling into step behind her. Your procedure, Liana said evenly, was to be rude, dismissive, and blatantly unprofessional. My procedure, she picked up her carry-on with deliberate precision, is to withdraw financial support from any company that allows people like you to represent them to the public. Stratacor will be taking its business elsewhere. We maintain a multi-million-dollar annual corporate travel account. You can be certain not another cent of it will be spent with your airline. The words hit like hammer blows. The mention of a multi-million-dollar account hung in the air, heavy enough to draw oxygen from the space around the gate. Heads turned, phones discreetly angled toward the scene. A young traveler with a laptop bag plastered in conference stickers stared in open fascination, his fingers frozen above his keyboard. Marla Givens stood rooted, her mind a blur of disbelief and panic. This had to be a misunderstanding, a mistake. She'd just been doing her job. But when she glanced toward the junior agent for backup, he refused to meet her eyes, his focus glued to his monitor as if it were a lifeline. With her team assembled and moving toward the main terminal, Liana gave Marla one last look. There was no gloating in her expression, only quiet, unshakable finality. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Marla alone in the wreckage of her own prejudice. The ripple from that single text message still echoing in the suddenly subdued atmosphere at Gate C-12. The Stratacor withdrawal was an exercise in precise coordination. Daniel Park moved among the group like a conductor, directing departures with crisp efficiency. Phones were already out, private jet arrangements finalized, hotel bookings canceled, families updated. There was disappointment, yes, but no hesitation. The insult to their leader was an insult to the company's values. Her stand was their stand. Back at the gate, panic set in. The young agent whispered into his radio, voice tight. Yes, sir. All 50 passengers. First in business. Yes, every single one. Marla's skin prickled cold. Multi-million-dollar annual corporate account looped endlessly in her head. This wasn't a customer service issue anymore. This was career-ending territory. Then a man in a slightly strained airline suit arrived at near sprint. Robert Maddox, duty operations manager for Continental Apex Air, was a man whose work life was a series of controlled crises. But the situation radiating from Gate C-12 felt like an inferno. What in God's name is happening here? He barked, eyes darting between Marla and the junior agent. Central Ops says a 50-person corporate group just canceled en masse. Explain. Now, the young agent stammered. There was a disagreement with a passenger. Marla's voice came out defensive, sharp. I was following procedure, Robert. This woman, she was in the priority line, and I. You what? Robert snapped, cutting her off. Did you look at her ticket? Well, eventually, yes. She was first class, but her attitude. Robert's voice rose, his face flushing in disbelief. Do you have any idea who you just drove off? That was Dr. Liana Mercer. Her company, Stratacor Systems, is one of the largest tech firms in the country. Their corporate account is based out of our Chicago HQ. It's massive. He ran a hand over his thinning hair, the strain aging him in real time. Where is she? I need to fix this. The junior agent raised a trembling hand, pointing down the concourse. "They just left, sir." Toward the main exit. Robert didn't respond. He simply broke into an awkward, determined run, weaving through startled travelers, chasing the retreating shadow of an account in a relationship that might already be gone forever. He spotted the group just as they reached the glass doors marking the end of the secure area. "Ms. Navarro," he called out, his voice tight and slightly winded. "Please, just a moment of your time." Liana stopped, turning slowly. Her expression gave nothing away, but the 49 people behind her instinctively paused as well, forming an unspoken barrier between her and the rest of the terminal. The man jogged up, adjusting his tie in a clumsy attempt to appear composed. "Ms. Navarro," he said, slightly out of breath, "Ethan Ward, Duty Operations Manager for Atlas Continental Air. On behalf of the airline, I want to extend my deepest apologies for any misunderstanding at the gate." His smile was polished, measured, the kind perfected in corporate training videos, meant to smooth over tempers with a gentle sheen of contrition. Liana didn't blink. "Mr. Ward, there was no misunderstanding. Your employee made an explicit decision to question my presence in the first-class line because of how I look. She did not believe a Latina woman could hold that ticket. That is not confusion. That is bias, deliberate, visible, and harmful." The smile faltered. This was not going to be the quick apology and a voucher resolution he had been hoping for. "I assure you," he tried again, "that isn't what our airline stands for. The agent is a longtime staff member, perhaps a little overzealous in enforcing boarding protocols, but I'm certain there was no personal offense intended." The words landed like a misstep off a curb. Liana's voice stayed calm, but now carried a dangerous stillness. "Mr. Ward, do you believe prejudice is only a problem if it is intentionally personal?" She didn't see a paying passenger. She saw a stereotype. "And now you're defending her actions instead of addressing the fact that your systems allowed them to happen. That tells me exactly where your company's priorities are." Beside her, Daniel Kim took one step forward. "Mr. Ward," he said evenly, "we have 50 staff members here. We were flying to Geneva to finalize a deal worth over $200 million. This kind of work demands trust, professionalism, and respect. Your airline just demonstrated that it cannot guarantee even the baseline treatment required for us to place our people in your care." Ward's color drained. That number, 200 million, hung in the air like an alarm bell. "Please," he said, the corporate polish beginning to crack, "let's not make a final decision yet. I'll personally escort your team onto the flight. You'll have every comfort we can provide. We'll launch a full investigation into the incident immediately. If necessary, we'll terminate the employee. Just don't walk away from this flight." Liana shook her head slowly, the gesture carrying more weight than any raised voice. "You still think this is about making me comfortable? It's not. It's about the integrity of my company and the safety of my employees. Removing one agent under pressure doesn't erase the culture that empowered her to act this way. That culture is the real problem, and your defense of it proves it's not about to change." She glanced at her phone. "Our new travel arrangements are confirmed. Our luggage is being retrieved. You'll receive an invoice for the disruption." Without waiting for his reply, she turned, and this time the movement was final. Her team flowed with her, an unbroken current exiting the terminal. Ward stood in their wake, the full weight of the loss pressing down. This wasn't just a public relations crisis. It was a gaping wound in revenue, reputation, and trust. He had walked up thinking he could douse the fire. Instead, he had walked straight into the flames. Back at the gate, the agent, Melissa Crane, watched his approach, her posture stiff with anticipation. Ward didn't look at her. He picked up the radio, his voice low and clipped. "Security to gate 14. Please escort him. Crane to the operations office. Suspend her credentials effective immediately. Do you want me to now also rewrite the first part of this scene, the moment she is stopped at the first class line, so it perfectly flows into this ending? That way the whole sequence will feel seamless and YouTube story ready. The terminal lights seemed harsher than usual as Marissa's pulse hammered in her ears. "Ethan, wait," she called, her voice breaking just enough to betray panic. "You can't do this. It was a mistake." He finally turned toward her, and the look in his eyes stripped away any last thread of hope she'd been holding. There was no sympathy, only cold, measured fury. "You didn't just make a mistake, Marissa," he said, each word deliberate. "You just cost us the Navarro account. And probably a lot more than that. You're finished." The shockwave from Liana Navarro's silent action had gone far beyond the gate. What began as a ripple was now a full-force quake, and the fault lines under Atlas Continental Air were just starting to split. The story didn't stay contained within the steel and glass walls of JFK for long. In the age of social media, privacy had the lifespan of steam. Oliver Grant, a graduate student in engineering who had watched the entire exchange unfold from a nearby row of seats, was already typing furiously before Liana's team had even cleared security. He hadn't filmed anything. He believed some moments deserved to live outside the glare of a camera, but he had caught every word, every glance, every precise move. He was an avid follower of Navarro Technologies, having studied their growth for a thesis project. Seeing Liana in person, then witnessing her measured, razor-sharp refusal to bend, left him almost dizzy with adrenaline. On X, formerly Twitter, and LinkedIn, Oliver posted a detailed account, tagging both Navarro Tech and Atlas Continental Air. He didn't embellish. He didn't call names. He simply relayed the facts. The dismissive tone from the gate agent, Liana's calm but uncompromising rebuttal, the unified precision with which her team left, and the duty manager's failed attempt to mend the damage. He ended with one line. "Today I saw what leadership really is. It's not the loudest voice. It's the quiet conviction that won't move, no matter the pressure. Navarro Tech doesn't just create the future, they act like it." Atlas Continental Air has some serious reckoning to do. The post caught fire. Within an hour, it had been shared thousands of times. Tech journalists, equity advocates, and prominent CEOs reposted it. The hashtags #NavarroTech and #FlyingWhile trended across platforms. Oliver's tone, measured, credible, and detailed, made his account more potent than any grainy video could have been. By the time Liana and her team were settling into the leather seats of a Gulfstream G650 at a nearby private airfield, their story had become the top headline on several major news outlets. Atlas Continental Air's feeds were a digital riot of outrage, and their stock, steady when the markets opened, began to slide. The damage didn't stop with public image. In the mirrored glass headquarters of Transatlantic Aviation Group, the parent company of Atlas Continental, news of the incident detonated in the middle of a quarterly budget meeting. Richard Halverson, TAG CEO, was in mid-sentence when his chief of communications burst into the boardroom, face tight, phone in hand. "Sir, we've got a 5-alarm situation," he said, skipping the usual corporate pleasantries. The meeting froze. The comms chief laid out the incident in blunt detail. Halverson's jaw tightened. One agent, one manager, and they couldn't control it. His voice was low but lethal. "Fire them both. Put out an apology. Offer the company 1,000,000 frequent flyer miles. Make it disappear." "It's not that simple," the comms chief replied, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. "There's another layer." He slid a tablet across the table. "It's about the deal Navarro Tech was flying to Geneva to sign." Halverson scanned the document, but he didn't need to reach the bottom before his posture changed. "They're partnering with Neuralink Medical Systems, the comms chief said quietly. Halverson's face drained of color. Neuralink, he murmured. This wasn't just another tech company. This was one of the most strategically important players in the global medical innovation space. One TAG's own strategic partners had been courting for years. They were one of TAG's most important new partners, critical to the explosive growth of its high-margin air freight division. Just a week earlier, TAG had inked a 10-year exclusive deal worth $500 million to transport Neuralink Medical Systems' high-value, highly sensitive surgical equipment worldwide. The press release was still fresh on the company's website, framed as a cornerstone of their next decade of expansion. "Go on," Halverson said, his voice so quiet it felt heavier than a shout. "Those next-gen surgical simulators, the ones the freight deal centers on, require a new haptic feedback platform to work," the comms chief explained. "Not just any platform. This one has to meet Neuralink's extreme technical requirements for realistic surgical training." Halverson's eyes narrowed. "There's only one vendor on the planet that can supply that system," he murmured. The comms chief nodded. "Navarro Technologies." The name landed like lead. Liana Navarro hadn't just been on her way to sign a lucrative tech deal. She'd been heading to finalize the last piece of TAG's own $500 million freight contract. If Navarro Tech backed out because of what happened at JFK, Neuralink's product launch would collapse before it began. And when that happened, Neuralink's board would demand to know why their carefully chosen freight partner had allowed sheer, preventable incompetence to sabotage their flagship project. The scope of the disaster snapped into focus. This wasn't about losing a VIP travel account. It wasn't even just about bad press. The careless prejudice of one gate agent had put TAG's 10-year strategic plan in jeopardy. The fallout wouldn't be a few million. It could snowball into a $100 million implosion. Halverson rose slowly from his chair, his face carved into something cold and dangerous. Liana's quiet, calculated defiance had traveled all the way to his corner office, and now it threatened to level the building around him. "Give me Maxwell at JFK," he said. "Now, and give me Liana Navarro's number. I don't care how you do it. Find it." The shockwave was becoming a tidal wave. Miles away, in a bland, windowless office tucked inside the airport's administrative wing, Cheryl Voss sat staring at her hands. 2 hours had passed since Robert Maxwell walked out, leaving her with a cup of cold coffee and the weight of his final words. Her security badge and ID sat on the table like discarded relics, symbols of the 22 years she had spent at Atlas Continental Air. Now she was just Cheryl. In her mind's replay of the incident, she was still the wrong party. The passenger, Navarro, had been arrogant, entitled. Cheryl had simply been upholding procedure, keeping order at the gate. It had nothing to do with race. That was the version she repeated to herself, clinging to it like driftwood in rough seas. But beneath that story, a smaller, quieter voice kept whispering the truth. She hadn't even asked to see the boarding pass. She had looked at the woman, Latina, poised, dressed sharply, and made an assumption. That was it. That was the entire calculation. She'd waved through dozens of white passengers in similar attire without a thought. But something about this woman had stirred something ugly and unexamined inside her, and she'd acted on it without thinking. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. "Shell, are you okay?" Turn on the news. With shaking hands, she opened a news app. The headline hit like a blow. Tech CEO Liana Navarro pulls entire team from flight after alleged racial profiling by airline staff. Her chest tightened. They were talking about her. The world was talking about her. The article quoted Oliver Grant's viral post and detailed how Navarro had grounded her 50-person team and canceled a high-stakes international meeting. And it was all traced back to a single, irreversible choice she had made in a moment that was now defining her life. A new notification flashed across her screen. Statement from Transatlantic Global Air Group, TGG, and its subsidiary Atlas Continental Air are aware of a deeply troubling incident that took place today at JFK International. The alleged conduct is unacceptable and runs counter to our values of respect and inclusion. A thorough investigation is underway. The employee in question has been suspended without pay pending the outcome. We are making every effort to reach Ms. Navarro and the Navarro Tech team to extend our apologies and address this matter directly. Suspended without pay. The phrase landed like an ice bath. Whatever thin hope Cheryl had been clinging to was now dissolving fast. The door opened. Robert Maxwell stepped inside, flanked by two corporate-looking strangers in dark suits. She didn't recognize them. They were from TGAG headquarters. The reckoning had arrived. The questioning was swift and merciless. There were no inquiries about feelings, no room for explanations, only facts. Ms. Voss, one of the suits began, voice clipped and impersonal. Did you request to see Ms. Navarro's boarding pass before directing her to the economy queue? Cheryl swallowed. No, but yes or no? No. So you made a judgment about her eligibility for first-class boarding without verifying documentation? I thought. What was this assumption based on? The second suit asked, eyes sharp. Silence stretched between them. What could she say? That Navarro didn't look like a first-class passenger. Even in her own mind, the prejudice in that thought was now searingly obvious. I made a mistake, she whispered. The questioning went on, peeling away each defense until she sat there stripped of all the stories she'd told herself. At last, the first suit slid a document toward her. Your employment with Atlas Continental Air is terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct and violation of anti-discrimination policy. Sign here. Her hand shook as she stared at the page. Before she could pick up the pen, her phone buzzed again, a calendar reminder. Appointment. Dr. Eastman, Milo's neuroscan results. A wave of nausea rose. Milo, her 14-year-old son, had been battling a rare degenerative neurological disorder for the past year. His coordination was slowly unraveling. The local neurologists had no answers, until finally they were referred to a specialist in Boston, part of a trial program using cutting-edge diagnostics. Today was the day they'd learn what came next. Hours later, sitting alone in her car in the airport parking lot, job gone, reputation in ruins, she dialed the doctor. Cheryl, it's Dr. Eastman, came the gentle voice. I have Milo's results. The good news is we have a definitive diagnosis. The bad news is that it's progressing, but there's a new therapy in development. It's groundbreaking. It uses targeted haptic feedback to retrain the brain's neural pathways. Early trials are showing remarkable results. A flicker of hope stirred. Haptic feedback? Who makes it? It's extraordinary technology, Eastman said, his tone lifting. We can produce precise, tactile sensations to stimulate the damaged neural networks. The system we're trying to secure for our program, the one that could really help Milo, is made by Navarro Technologies. They're the undisputed leader. The phone slipped from Cheryl's fingers, landing on the passenger seat with a dull thud. Navarro Technologies, the company founded by the woman she had publicly humiliated just hours earlier. The only realistic hope for her son's future was the work of the person she had dismissed out of reflex and bias. The irony was so staggering it hollowed her out. It wasn't just her job that was gone. It wasn't just her reputation. Her own unthinking prejudice had caused her to burn the single bridge that might have led to saving her child. She hadn't just been wrong. She had been catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. This wasn't about losing a paycheck. This was about losing a future. The knowledge sat on her chest like a boulder, crushing and final. 8 miles above the restless Atlantic, The Falcon 8X moved through the night like a blade. Inside, cream leather and polished ebony framed a world utterly separate from the chaos of JFK's terminal. The cabin was hushed but not idle. There was no champagne, no celebration. Only quiet purpose. Near the front, two senior engineers leaned over a holographic schematic, adjusting designs in swift, practiced movements. In the rear, Clara, the company's legal counsel, was dissecting the Orion biomedical contract line by line, her eyes scanning for any vulnerability. The team had been inconvenienced by the disruption, but they were anchored by something stronger than frustration: solidarity. This wasn't just their leader's company, it was their company, too. Naomi Navarro sat alone in a forward seat, a tablet with market data glowing dimly in her lap, untouched. Her gaze was fixed out the window, past the gentle curve of the earth, into the deep, starlit dark. The confrontation at the gate replayed in her mind, not with anger now, but with the cool detachment of someone assessing the long-term cost. The private charter had been an unplanned, six-figure hit. The delay would ripple through their schedule. And the risk, however small, to the Orion deal was real. 50 people had their plans upended because she had drawn a line in the sand. Principles always had a price. She wondered, briefly, if this one had been too high. David Lynn approached, settling into the seat across from her. His expression was calm, almost steadying. "No one's questioning you, Naomi," he said. "The team chat is full of messages, people saying they're proud. They feel seen. You made an investment in what this company is, and those always pay the biggest return." She managed a faint smile. "Our company's soul is expensive. The best things always are," he replied. "So what's next?" "Harrison's office has been calling Maria every 5 minutes. They're desperate." "Desperation can lead to mistakes," Naomi murmured, "or it can lead to clarity. We'll see which one this is." Her satellite phone chirped. Maria's voice came through, slightly hushed. "Naomi, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Alastair Harrison is on the line. He refused to schedule, says it's a matter of extreme mutual importance." He sounds composed, but under real strain. Naomi considered. She could make him wait, let the discomfort sharpen. But that would be a power move, not a solution. And she was here to solve problems, not posture. Put him through. A beat later, the smooth, patrician tones of Alastair Harrison filled the cabin. "Ms. Navarro, thank you for taking my call." "Mr. Harrison," Naomi replied evenly, her voice offering nothing. "I'll be direct. I've been fully briefed on the appalling incident at JFK this morning. On behalf of Transatlantic Global Air Group, I extend my most sincere and unconditional apology. The behavior of our employee was disgraceful and utterly at odds with our values. It was flawless as far as corporate apologies went, delivered with precision, polished to neutrality. I appreciate the sentiment," Naomi said, unmoved. "But I've already heard a similar apology from your Mr. Maxwell, just before he tried to frame it as overzealousness." A sharp breath caught on the other end of the line. Naomi had just made it clear. Empty words weren't going to work. Mr. Maxwell's handling of the situation was unacceptable, Harrison said, his voice taut. "It's being addressed decisively. The gate agent's employment has been terminated. But I know that's not a solution. That's a reaction." "You're right," Naomi replied evenly. "It's not a solution. The solution would be to address the culture that made your agent feel comfortable acting on her prejudice in the first place." There was a pause, the kind that signaled he understood he was speaking to someone who wouldn't be placated with token gestures. "You're absolutely correct," he said, "and that's why I'm calling. Ms. Navarro, I am aware your flight to London was for a meeting with Orion Biomedical." He let the name hang for a beat. "I also know that Orly's technology is the central component of their new surgical simulator. the same simulator that underpins a $500 million exclusive freight contract we just signed with them. The admission was deliberate, exposing a vulnerability few executives would reveal. It wasn't the language of damage control. It was the language of negotiation between equals. So, Naomi said, connecting the pieces, "You're not just calling as the CEO of the airline that humiliated me. You're calling as a man whose other business interests are now at risk because of that humiliation." "Yes," Harrison admitted. The word seemed to cost him something. "My company's failure has put those interests in jeopardy. I own that, which is why I'm not asking for a favor. I'm proposing a new foundation for our relationship, if you're willing to even consider one." Naomi leaned forward slightly, curiosity tempered by caution. "I'm listening." "First," Harrison began, "we will refund every dollar Orleans has spent with any of our carriers in the past fiscal year. Second, we'll cover all costs from this disruption, including the charter for your current flight. Third, and most importantly, I am personally committing $10 million to a complete overhaul of our diversity, equity, and inclusion training for all 60,000 of our frontline employees. I want Orleans to serve as a paid consultant in selecting the firm that will design and implement the program. I want your standards to become our standards." It was concrete, systemic, and far larger than she'd expected. "Who will have oversight?" Naomi asked, pressing him. "How will you measure results? A $10 million program is meaningless if it's just a PR move." "An independent board," Harrison replied without hesitation, "with a seat for a representative of your choosing. We'll base success on independent audits and verified customer feedback. Results will be made public, good or bad. We have to be better, and you've made that painfully clear." Naomi let the silence stretch before answering. This was what real change looked like. Not a headline or a lawsuit, but a structural shift forced into being by accountability. "Send me the proposal in writing," she said at last. "Every detail. I'll review it after my business in London. That's all I can promise right now." "Thank you, Ms. Navarro," Harrison said, the relief audible. "That's more than I deserve." The line went dead. David raised his eyebrows at her. "That," he said, "was a masterclass. You didn't just get an apology, you got a budget and a seat at the table." "Progress," Naomi said, the faintest glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "It's the only win that matters." 2 days later, she stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her suite at the Corinthia, looking over the Thames. The meeting with Orion Biomedical had gone flawlessly. Their CEO, Dr. Anaya Sharma, had greeted her not with formality, but with a warm embrace. "I heard what happened, Naomi," Anaya had said warmly. "What you did took courage. It's the same courage we see in your company's technology. We're proud to be your partner." The deal was signed. The future secured. Her phone chimed. A secure notification from a trusted source she sometimes relied on for deep corporate intelligence. The file was labeled JFK Incident Follow-Up. She opened it, scanning the clinical summary of terminations, frantic internal memos, and PR containment efforts. Then she reached a brief human interest section. It was a profile of Cynthia Vale. 22 years of service. A modest apartment in Queens. And one devastating detail. Her 14-year-old son, Adam, suffered from a rare neurological disorder. The report named the condition, the Boston specialist overseeing his case, and the single glimmer of hope, an experimental therapy dependent on a state-of-the-art haptic feedback system. The system built by Orleans Innovations. Naomi read the paragraph twice, then a third time. The lights of London blurred outside the window. The suffocating irony pressed in. She pictured Cynthia's face at the gate, tightened with bitterness and misplaced authority. She pictured her again, in a doctor's office, hearing that the only hope for her child's future depended on the very company, and the very person she had dismissed with prejudice. There was no triumph in knowing this, no vindication, only a deep, hollow sadness. Cynthia's prejudice had cost her more than a job. It had, in a cruel way, put her own child in jeopardy. Naomi crossed the room and called David from the adjoining suite. When he arrived, she simply handed him the tablet. His normally steady face faltered. "My God," he murmured, "to be so blinded by hate that you stand in the way of a miracle for your own child." He glanced at her. "It's tragic, but it's her choice, Naomi. She made her bed. Did her son?" Naomi asked quietly. "He's 14, David. He didn't do anything. He's just sick. And the reason we build what we build, the reason we push so hard, is to help people. To give a surgeon a steadier hand. To give a pilot better control. And maybe, just maybe, to give a sick kid a shot at recovery. We can't let her prejudice become a wall between us and our mission." David understood instantly. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to do what builders do," she said. "I'm going to build a bridge." Her first call was to Boston. She got Dr. Edwards on the line, introduced herself, and listened as he described his research with fervor. Then she made her offer. "As part of our new Oralise Cares initiative, we're donating 3 of our NeuroHaptic 7 systems to your hospital's program. We'll also provide an on-site technician for 6 months to ensure flawless integration. We believe in your work." The doctor was stunned, stumbling over his thanks. Her second call was to Oralis CFO. Her instructions were exact. "You'll work with the Children's Neurological Health Foundation of New York to create a fully endowed grant. It will be called the Anonymous Pioneer Grant. Its purpose: cover all treatment, travel, and accommodation expenses for one patient and guardian to participate in Dr. Edwards' program in Boston. The first recipient will be a 14-year-old boy from Queens named Adam Vale. My name and Oralis' name are never to be linked to it. Is that understood?" It was. When the calls were complete, Naomi returned to the window. The vast city spread beneath her like a web of connections, each light a life. She had arrived in London after one silent act of defiance that dismantled a wall of disrespect. Now she had made another, a quiet, invisible act of grace that would open a door, span a divide, and give a boy a new flight path toward healing. One gesture was for her dignity. This one was for her soul. This story reveals a powerful truth. Real strength doesn't shout. It stands firm, even in silence. Dr. Celine Morris's quiet gesture didn't just cancel a flight. It rattled the walls of a corporate powerhouse, forcing it to stare into a prejudice it had long swept under the rug. But this isn't just a tale of payback. It's the story of a woman who, in the face of ignorance designed to shrink her, chose not to return insult with insult. Instead, she ended with a single quiet act of extraordinary grace. In that moment, she proved that the highest form of power is the ability to rise above, to meet injustice without becoming what it tried to make you. It's a reminder that our biases carry real consequences, consequences that can echo far beyond the moment they're born. If this story of principled strength and profound grace spoke to you, tap that like button and share it with someone who needs the reminder. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story about the moments that truly define us. What's your take on Dr. Morris's final choice? Drop your thoughts in the comments.